So first of all, thank you all for being here and welcome. I want to take this conversation, we had a quick chat earlier, but beyond just melting ice caps and rising sea waters, but talk about what are we doing on the ground. How can all of us make little efforts, because I feel every effort counts, but how do we do that? And I'm really excited because our panel today is, the three of you are doing very diverse, distinct work, but it's all very interconnected, right? You're all sort of addressing similar issues, but in various ways, different scales, and different methodologies. And I'd like to highlight some of those. And I'm really hoping that we can explore what makes you tick, what makes you drive, and how can some of those ideas be translated to a larger audience, right? I'm going to start by just framing what we mean by the future. And this is something, again, that we had a quick chat about. But when climate futures, well, usually when we talk about the term climate futures, it's driven by data, right? It's scientific data. It's talking about forecasting and models and how do we make a resilient world for ourselves in the future. Interestingly, a couple of hours ago, someone said, what is future, right? Is it something that's happening the next moment? Is it 100 years from now? Is it going to be 10 years from now? Is it what was the past and is present? It's all a little vague, but hopefully through our conversation, we can iron out some of those details as well. But also, how do we grant agency to design and cultural practices? And I would like to include design within cultural practices to reimagine a sustainable, adaptive, and resilient world, right? So I'm going to start with you, Miguel, because you said something really interesting. We talked about the future as a distant concept, right? And you said that, I'll quote you, there's a common notion that the future is terrifying, and therefore, nor do we talk about it, and nor do we think about how to address it. And I think that's very true. On the other hand, we also know that the future, unquote, but on the other hand, we also know that the future is more and more being informed by what we do today, right? The Princeton University has an organization called the Climate Futures Initiative, and they actually made a statement saying humanity for the first time has a constructed future, which I thought was fascinating. So tell us, Miguel, how do you balance the urgency of the climate crisis, right, with the need to avoid paralyzing people with fear? How do we do that through an exercise like a biennale that is addressing such a wide and diverse audience?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to be here, and especially to be quoted before I asked the question. It's a total luxury. Well, just to give a little bit of context about where my responses are coming from, I'm both an industrial designer and a cultural manager. I organize, as the introduction stated, a design and architectural biennial in Madrid, Spain. And I think many of the lessons that I've learned, I think, has to do with this notion of positivity. Design, I think what it offers us is a series of tools that give us the ability to project, right? We can project a series of things. We can project forecasts, we can project a table, a water bottle, we can project a series of concepts. But I think the innate nature of design, almost from a philosophical perspective, requires us to think ahead, think towards the future, right? Be it a biennial, a critical design project, a work of architecture, but the innate process of design gives us this ability to project. So I think this ignites and injects us with a lot of positivity, disregarding obviously the general media agenda towards this idea that the future doesn't exist, that everything's a disaster. But I think the main thing, I think, to state as an opener is that designers and architects and people that are subject to the design process have an innate positivity to the process because there is an obligation and a desire to create.
Because you enjoyed the first quote, I'm going to quote you again. So you also said, and this is just to kind of extend what you're saying now, if we can't have a positive vision about the potential of a different future, it will be very hard to create it. And I think that's a very powerful statement, right? Because yes, of course, we are steeped in cynicism, and let's not even get started about the news and media and all of that. But if we can't imagine an alternative to what we are moving towards, how do you start to cater towards it? And that's one, for me, when I research, if you just kind of Google climate futures, right, it's all about how do you become resilient. But the point is, do we really want to become resilient to what is coming, or can we actually fix the problem a little bit more now? And that brings me to you, Adam, because you actually talk about this, right? You talk about fixing mindsets. And it's not necessarily about changing mindsets, but it's about fixing mindsets. And which implies a deeper level of intervention, I feel, right? It's not about skimming the surface. It's not about just equipping people and giving them a set of tools or a book and say, okay, read this and now you'll know what's happening. But it's about fixing how you think, right? So, and you run this institution called the DUST Institute. Adam also has this incredible installation outside. So if you exit the symposium hall and you look at the far right, there's this big balloon, with the image right there, which you have to go and see. Please make it a point to go have a look at it. We'll probably request Adam to take us to his installation at the end of the talk. But coming back to my question, that when you're talking about raising awareness to actually fix a mindset and allowing people to rethink their relationship with the environment, right? Could you share an example of this fixing in action in maybe something that you've done? Because again, your work talks about sciences, it talks about the data, but it talks about turning and transforming that data into very personal experiences. So could you elaborate on that? But I'm really curious about the fixing bit.
First of all, thank you for being here. I'm very honored to have the opportunity to share the ideas, what we are working on DUST Institute that have been amazingly introduced. Thank you. And when it comes to the work of the Institute, or how we position itself, especially within the design perspective, is that we view design as really a communication tool, how to raise awareness about different environmental challenges that are spanning from the human impact upon the environment, the loss of biodiversity, but also, I mean, these kind of like outcomes that come from these research projects are usually, as you can see outside of this symposium hall, done or presented in interactive installations, in exhibition format, or even in learning workshops, where we provide really a personal experience how to deconstruct very complex environmental data into a personal experience. And just to give you a very, very recent example, on slides behind me, there is a research project that we are currently doing on architectural surfaces, as we believe that the architectural surface is is really kind of like unresearched phenomenon, and especially in urban environments nowadays, where lies lots of potential when it comes to projecting climate futures. And we look at the architecture surface from the perspective of its visuality. So we start to look at what appears naturally on architecture surfaces. And we discovered that it's not only dirt that appears there, but it's a microbiome that the surfaces has. It's certain kind of like a biofilm that starts to develop over time naturally on any architecture surface. And this biofilm has the function to filter the air, to absorb CO2 from the environment, but also to protect the building material, and also, for example, to alleviate heat islands in cities. So then the question is why we tend to maintain architectural surfaces in a way that they appear visually clean, visually very neutral, and why we reject any kind of dirt that happens on architecture surfaces. And this is exactly where the work of DUST Institutes comes in, that we try to somehow deconstruct these very complex nature of microbiome and how these microbiomes are appearing, why they are important, into a personalized experience. So we've done an intervention in Vienna in one of the public housing, on the facade of a public housing project that you can, I think, see shortly on the slides that are coming, and we've basically cleaned 10-meter diameter circle in this microbiome film just to see the visual difference, how the clean and the activated surface is looking like. And around that, we organized, it's this project, and around this, we organized very personalized workshop program that we've actually learned the community to recognize what actually grows on the surface. And they've been able to recognize with this biopatina tool that we've developed that these surfaces are containing, for example, cyanobacteria, fungi, and lichens that can filter the environment.
So have you seen that these kinds of exercises, right, where you're now getting people to recognize the, let's say, the good stains from the bad, right? What is their reaction to this? Are they trying to clean their buildings less, or are they more appreciative about it, or is it just a matter of, being more aware? But what is actionable from that?
Well, I mean, especially from this project, what we are trying to convey into the community is that there is a completely different perspective on care, how we provide or maintain an actual building. And this project is not talking about the interior spaces or interior surfaces. Of course, that's scientifically proven, no stains, no molds, no microorganisms indoors. But why do we need to care about the indoor surfaces in such a way as we take about exterior surfaces? So what we are trying to kind of like suggest is that the less you care about the outdoor surface, the better it is for the urban environments, which is completely switch of perspective, especially when it comes to European context, when also the municipalities are trying to maintain the buildings as clean as possible because they think it's the way how they provide care for the citizens, but they basically uncare the environmental aspect of the building.
I like how you brought in the word care, because that's really essential, right? And I'm going to jump to you, Ananya. When we're talking about caring about the environment, and we're talking about, who is caring for the environment? Who are the people who are responsible for the environment in a certain way? But also these are the people who are responsible for the future, that are building the future, right? And when we talk about that, again, when I said the future, right, when we talk about like organizations, it's always big organizations, authorities. You're always looking at the RWA to fix a matter, right? But you have spent a lot of time working with the community. Like a lot of your work is community driven, where you're not only addressing somebody, but you're actually working with them. You involve them in the process. And I would be very curious to understand how that, like the role of care and care for your environment in that process, which is very personal. And what's exciting here is that while Miguel is addressing like this, at a city level, you're addressing the macro, while a lot of your interventions are at a personal level, you're working in different sizes and scales of communities, right? And through a lot of the work that you're doing. And you'll see this in some of the projects that are being rotated, right? So whether it's the Uran Park that kind of cascades down the hill, or it's, I read about, and I'm going to get this name wrong, but the circular building which had, that you actually built for recreation for workers during COVID, right? So if you can comment a little bit about the idea of care in trying to form or formulate a more sensitive future with the people that you're working with.
So I think everyone cares. And
that's very optimistic of you.
No, they do. I mean, you look at the stuff around here, and sure, there's a lot of luxury on show. There's a lot of use of material on show out here, which maybe you could use a little bit less, and things would be a lot more sustainable. But nonetheless, I think everyone cares. The difficulty is, and you framed the question in terms of people care, but they don't know what to do. They don't know what can be done. And the question for me with working with our communities and clients is, what are the little steps that we can take? And for me, the communication piece in India at least changed, where I said, let's not talk about climate futures, let's start talking about pollution today. And that switch really got everyone thinking. And overseas, again, when it comes to clients and communities trying to equate money today versus a future tomorrow, this is where the challenge starts to come. But when you work with the community and you're working with a understanding that sustainability and resilience is actually adding value today, that actually enables you to create value-added buildings today which are not expensive, or value-added building spaces today which are not expensive. There's this view that somehow the other, to be good for the climate, you have to be expensive. You don't have to be. That building out there that you're seeing, that canopy is incredibly cheap because it's made with low-cost materials which will degrade over time, and it'll require some craftsmen to rebuild it. In India, that doesn't cost any money at all. So changing the way we were thinking about actually building a resilient building and allowing maintenance to be a part of resiliency and allowing degradation to be a part of resiliency, which kind of works so much with what Adam was talking about in terms of how the building surfaces might actually be helping depollute your environment without even knowing it, and we spend so much time cleaning everything up. Maybe that's not required. And therefore, you're absolutely right. There is a wonderful chain running through our thoughts. And I firmly believe everyone cares. Design, creation is an act of optimism. If we don't believe that, then there's no point being here and there's no point creating. That's why I definitely agree with Miguel on that one.
You know, you actually touched upon something that I wanted to end the conversation with, so I'm going to keep that for later, but reframing the question. I think that is key, right? Because right now we are looking, okay, I'm talking about it, so I'll put that aside. But I do want to talk to you about in your work, right? Because you're working with communities, you're giving them agency, right? How do you ensure that they have access to that agency in order to continue to do the work that they're doing outside of the project? You know, once you step away from it and you're gone and you're doing other things, how do they continue to have access to that agency at a very inherent level, right? If you have some examples of that, that would be great.
So I think the one key example that keeps coming back to me is the example of Uran, where Uran was a park that was derelict. It was made by the government of Udaipur, but it was just a concrete jungle, and there was, you know, syringes and condoms out there more than anything else, broken alcohol bottles. And when we started building it, the local kids used to come and throw stones at the laborers because, you know, they had nothing else to do. And when we built it and we opened it for the first time, then they would come and start to break things. And then we just had a chat with them. We said, guys, what's going on? We've created this thing. Why are you breaking it? And a few conversations later, they actually started enjoying coming there. And a flip took place. The people who were breaking things became the people who take care of things now. So they're actually coming in every weekend and cleaning the whole place up. And the reality is, it wasn't us who gave them agency. It was they discovered their agency through good design. And I think that's the other piece. We're not some white savior kind of people coming out here and trying to create agency for people. We're just helping people discover that everybody has agency. Whether it's an incredibly small scale, you're walking down a street and you're picking up some litter that you see, or it's an incredibly large scale where you can redefine how cities work, like we saw in Brian's presentation. Everybody has agency, and our job as designers and as communicators is to make sure that we can present people the opportunities of discovering their own agency.
I think that's a sign of good design, right? Is if you allow people to feel a part of it, if they start to own it. I think ownership is critical in this question. And that brings me to Miguel, to you, is that when you're at the Biennale, you are working at a more conceptual level. It's more theoretical. You're working with practitioners, but you're also working with academics and with curators, right? How do you translate high-level thinking? Because now you are actually catering and you're addressing a large crowd. And that, the diversity of the crowd is everywhere from an expert to an enthusiast to a student to a child, right? The language that you use to communicate your motives and your intentions, how do you actually translate that high-level thinking onto the ground? And if you have an example of that, that would be great.
Sure. I think one of the best examples is actually projected here. But that's certainly a great question. I really do think it's very important in contemporary design theory and design practice, no, in architectural theory as well, which is, right, bridging academia, which etymologically it literally means distance from, no, your distance from the reality with the actual reality, no? Luckily in our biennial, we get to work with a lot of fantastic curators and academics, people who try to rethink design and architecture in a completely different way. And it is certainly challenging. We've had our situations where people have gone to our shows and asked us, I don't really understand anything. But I think our most successful examples are shows in which we really are able to provide a immersive experience. So in terms of the images that we're seeing here, there's an image before or later, which is sort of this yellow desert landscape with a smoky background, which is quite related to the theme of today, which is a intervention by an architectural studio from Milan called Parasite 2.0. And it's an intervention called Desert Plateau, which is quite dystopian. And what it proposes is a speculative vision of architecture and design in which everything is basically flattened out, and it proposes through an architectural installation with a smoke machine, you can sort of see it here, a smoke machine, a live workshop inside the space. It proposes basically a collaborative space, yet with a completely dystopian image, right? So this is one of the many examples. But I think it is a challenge. I would say it's important to be self-critical in this sense, and we've been able to accomplish it sometimes and other times less in this sense. But I do believe that the physical experience, alluding to people's sensibility and sensitivity, is what helps bridge this gap between academic thought and being able to actually understand and process that thought.
I'm actually going to bring in that reframing question here. I think it's very appropriate because you've all spoken about your works and what you're doing and how you're engaging with communities, right? And you've kind of set yourselves up for a certain path and a certain journey that you're taking. But we all use language in a certain way, and if the way we use language and the way we frame questions gives us certain outcomes, right? But the minute you change the language or you change the question, your outcomes may be different. And Anya, you already kind of hit upon this a little bit. But I would really be interested for all of you to reflect a little bit on whether you have ever considered reframing the question for yourself. You're working with scientific data and translating that into personal engagements and experiences. You're working at a more theoretical, macro level and addressing a cityscape, right? Ananya, you're working with people. Yours is more about the execution of the project. So you're executing your thoughts in different ways, like we've established, right? Different audiences, different scales, different ways. But have you ever considered reframing that question for yourself, or trying to think of other ways that you might want to achieve similar outcomes? And B, if you haven't, and if you were to do that now, how do you think you would approach that? Adam.
Well, complicated question, but for me this reframing of the main question is happening, I would say, after every engagement with public. When I go to the public with my work and really speak to people, let them experience it. And the most valuable feedback is always from people outside of our field. Because this is also, how I aim my design to address to these kind of like communities, not to just professionals, just to kind of like navigate the discourse, but really to change mindset or fix the mindset of the communities. And the reframing of the question arrives every time after I visit different contexts. Therefore, I'm really glad to be here and to put out my work or present it in the Indian context, which is completely different to anything else that I've experienced so far from the experience that I had during this day, for example. So this reframing always comes after the discussions, and this exchange of thought with someone else is extremely crucial to navigate and to navigate the future of the work and what will come next. It's definitely coming from the exchange.
Is your process a constant sort of evolution and experimentation of your own thoughts?
Absolutely, and also the big part is also provoking myself with these thoughts. What happened if, and what I learned. Every time I go outside of any kind of exhibition, I really try to reflect what I've learned, what I heard, what actually really what is stuck in my mind after the day, and it's always projecting upon the next exhibition, next appearance, next public intervention.
Miguel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think speaking of our practices and the challenges that we try to give ourselves, I think my context is quite strange because I'm an industrial designer. I studied as an industrial designer, and my current practice is, for example, a lot more classical than the projects and the conceptualizations that we work on in the biennial, which is something that I reflect on a lot and even question myself about. But I think this has to do, in my case, with context, right? The biennial is born from a community-oriented vision towards providing a platform and towards providing something that hadn't been seen in the city of Madrid. And just as my design-based practice is based on context and based on a client's need or a personal project that then I want to pitch to a company and the company has a series of needs. So I think context is always something that is what really provokes me and helps me think in different ways. And sometimes it leads to projects that work and sometimes it doesn't, right? So my RIT was born in a very organic way from a context that had a series of needs, and then it exploded into sort of a larger biennial. Just as my design practice has maintained itself as a much more boutique-based practice with a small team where we really tackle each project in a very particular manner. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's sort of a continuation of this. Yeah.
So actually, things for me changed quite dramatically in terms of my view about what we need to do in India specifically to really start addressing climate issues. And I think 2 or 3 things changed for me. Number one, as an architect, I was always interested in it, but I realized that maybe I wasn't doing enough to help move the conversation forward. And we were super interested in our hometown Udaipur. It's a beautiful little city, and it has so much going for it, but nonetheless, we can see the pollution approaching us from up north. And we're sitting on a turning point. And so the family, the company, and the studio started to really think about what do we need to do to help Udaipur defend itself from this climate crisis that's approaching us. And a couple of things came to our mind. We get blinded by the idea of climate crisis. You kind of alluded to it right at the start because there are 2 other elements to this. There's economic value and resiliency, and there's social value and resiliency. And actually, if we can start to combine all 3, and it just so happens that diagram came up, we need to combine all 3 of those things, and we need to start to think very carefully about how do all 3 bits of resiliency result in a value chain that's continuous. And here, I'd like to go back to the conversation that Abha and was having right in the morning when they were talking about the government isn't doing enough to protect the heritage of India, to protect the cultural, architectural heritage of India. And I kind of realized, actually, and some gentleman asked a question from the audience that the South seems to be doing a better job, and the South is doing a better job because they actually value that heritage. And it's the piece that's been bugging me for the most is we keep, as an industry, asking government to do this, government to do that. And we forget that actually the people who are buying our products are the people who need to, or buying our services, the people who need to be educated. So we started this program in Studio SAR, which is we now have an urban design team and a communication team, which is starting to look at the city of Udaipur from an urban fabric perspective all the way down to a cultural perspective. We're saying, how do we engage the city to actually start to care a little bit about itself? And B, how do we engage the city to make sure that they know what to do once they care? So everything from cleaning a Baudi and cleaning a stepwell, and again, magically a stepwell was referred to in the previous talk, but Udaipur has 35 stepwells. People of Udaipur didn't know we had 35 stepwells. We probably have a few more. We found 35. Now, there are quite a few of them in quite a state of disrepair, but it's not very hard to clean them. So how about creating a movement of young people just keeping them clean? How about then working on the economic plan, or how do we make sure these is not just a project of keeping this Baudi clean, but maybe there's a cafe attached to the Baudi and it's activated again the way it used to be. And these kind of small interventions are going to make a massive difference to the city, because people will suddenly know that they actually have agency and be able to do something with that agency. And that's the job that we're putting together. So it's a massive reframing from just being an architect and doing good projects to now being an architect and communicating with the city at large.
You know, this one word that keeps getting repeated, the idea of resilience and resiliency, somehow bothers me a little bit, if I can be honest, right? Because like I said earlier also, what it means in a certain way is that you're becoming resilient to a changing condition, right? Or correct me if I'm wrong.
I would say, so you can be resilient by accepting a changing situation, or you can be resilient by becoming fitter and making your environment fitter. So I think resilience includes not hitting the crisis point, and it also includes, well, okay, some things the older generations have already left us with. So we know we're going to hit some climate change issues. So how do we diminish climate change, further climate change, and how do we diminish the impact of climate change? Both are covered in resiliency.
Absolutely. And so that's what, and I think that's a very valid point, and I think that that's something that needs to be talked about more. It's not only about making yourself resilient to climate change, and this is a pet peeve, right? All our conversations are usually human-centric, are about how do we save ourselves from what is to come, right? And I heard this word for the first time, surprisingly today, nature-centric. I didn't know that that was a term that was being used commonly, right? But I mean, in academia, it's very anthropocentric or non-anthropocentric. But I thought that was quite interesting that in conversation, someone said, oh, we are trying to design and make it more nature-centric. And I think that's an interesting aspect of things, right? That's also flipping the question and flipping the narrative around and saying that, what are you trying to make resilient, right? Is it just us that, oh, we will build bigger walls, or we will shift to higher grounds, or, you know, we will, like, how do we save our civilization? Or are we looking at that larger picture? And I think that becomes an important part of the conversation, but that's also something that's kind of like buried in the past a little bit. I thought it would be a good opportunity for all of you to talk a little bit about this, perhaps, but through your works. I know we didn't give you the opportunity to actually present your works earlier, but if I may, I've kind of picked a couple that I thought would be interesting. So, Adam, you've got the Blind Spot project, right? And it would be good that if you can tell us about integrating living organisms into the urban facade, but then what happens next, right? We were talking about the differentiation between natural dusts and man-made or unnatural dusts. And the other thing, if I can add to that, was how do you start to sensitize people towards that? So.
Well, I will
also
answer.
The 18, I'm sorry, but this fascinating statistic that we apparently breathe in about 18 kilos of dust in our lifetime, and that's a global average. So in India, and especially if you're in Delhi, that's probably going to be
Even
18
more.
in like 5 years, 10 years maybe. It's scary, but yeah.
Yes, and it's scary if you even see these 18 kilograms of dust in front of you.
Oh my God.
So I did it once as an artwork, and it's really a very evocative one.
My goodness.
No, but back to the question, I mean, I would maybe rather use the term biocentric than nature-centric because
Sure.
it automatically includes human and
Yeah.
does not exclude them in a way. And this is basically one of the principles that we try to use in Das Institute to really do the interventions that are biocentric. And also what it means is just to give you the historical context and how architecture really supported the split between nature and human-centric, that it arrives with modernism, that this idea of modernism was really to create buildings that are white, uniform, and basically opposed to organic and bioform. And I think now also the architecture discourse is at least trying to kind of like get rid of this even postmodern idea of this dichotomy between nature and man-made. And I think keeping or accepting biofilms or microorganisms that are appearing naturally on the building surfaces is a natural step to biocentric design in a way, that we learn to coexist with the environment rather to fight it, and we really try to search opportunities in other than human life forms to help us combat such a challenge as climate crisis. And it can be done only through doing proper research and to really work interdisciplinary and really outside of our discipline. So this is again something that brings us back to this blind spot project, that we really provocatively cleaned just a circle out of the biopatinated facade to really see the visual difference, and then to really sensitize people through careful and really demanding personal workshops that really learn people how to recognize what is bad and what is good on the facade, why to keep it, and why it helps the environment. So the methodologies are extremely complex, but at least we are trying to really bring these kind of methodologies into the practice and to also present it as a positive examples how it is possible to really combat such a difficult topic such as climate crisis, resilience, sustainability, not just, for example, building something else, but to look at what is already built and make something new out of it.
Thank you, and congratulations for all this amazing work that you're doing. Miguel, you've got a very provocatively titled project called the Wet Dreams exhibition. Would you like to tell us about that?
The name is both self-descriptive and very not self-descriptive, I think. But this was the title of our 2024 biennial. So every 2 years, we have a different theme. And this theme was developed by curator Marina Otero. She's a practitioner academic from Spain, but teaches in Columbia University in New York. And to also sort of detach the more capitalist agenda. So she worked a lot from a sort of neoliberal critique perspective, and tried to reinstate and redescribe design much from the lens of desire, and a desire towards the future and a desire towards relating ourselves with one another, and much less about designer-product relationship. And this was the theme of our last biennial, and she also then curated one of our largest shows up to date in a quite large museum in Madrid called Centro, which brought together a bunch of designers that worked with biodesign, speculative design, architecture, et cetera, et cetera. So it did really help thread the needle within what we talked about before, bridging academia and actual projects that really apply all of these concepts in a very productive manner, and in a way that hopefully can inspire other practitioners to think the same.
Great, thank you. Of course, a lot of this information is online, so whoever wants to know more about it, please, I would encourage you to check out all their media platforms. Ananya, I have to say one of my favorites is the Uran Park, right? It's incredible to see how it developed and how it kind of responded to the people over there, but how also people responded to it. And you had this cool canopy made of songbirds over there, right? So tell us a little bit about bringing in people while doing the project, but also this idea, like, was that canopy a sort of a proxy for bringing in more wildlife, or trying to also kind of camouflage that within the ecosystem of what it was. Because if you see the before and afters, it was quite kind of like barren land, and then it turns into this beautiful project which is built, but it doesn't really look as built, right? I haven't been there, unfortunately, but it looks like it's kind of like grown out of the ground in a certain way. So if you'd like to tell us a little bit about it.
Thank you so much for all those compliments. I think with Udan, we had a few kind of ideas that were brimming in our head. Udaipur is an incredibly hot city, so it gets to 45 degrees centigrade in the summer. And it's also a city which gets incredibly high winds. So when we were thinking about an outdoor space, we realized it can't just be an outdoor space for the winter, it needs to be an outdoor space for everywhere. So it needs to have a canopy, some covered space where people can get shade. But as soon as you start to think about large shaded spaces and large surface areas of shading, then you end up with a situation where there's a lot of structural engineering to deal with wind uplift. So we came up with this idea of these incredibly small things, lots of small things coming together to create shade. And Udaipur used to have murmurations of birds when I was a child. They don't exist anymore because they've all gone away. But so then it was the idea that if lots of little things come together to provide shade from rain, from the sunlight, then you have a canopy which kind of just emerges. And it was, I think, we were told that we were going to get the site 2 weeks before India's COVID lockdown. And I'd visited the site once. And it was during lockdown that I literally sketched this section out and I sent it to the team to say, guys, and the sketch of the section was very simple, just lots of dots and the section through to the lake. And I said, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for dots in the sky, a cloud of dots in the sky. And the view very simply was, how do we use very little material to have the largest impact and to be able to bring a sense of dynamic life to this space, which invites people in. And that's what that thing does, because that's at road level. And as people are walking by, driving by, they're like, what the heck is this colorful little thing? And they stop and they come in and it becomes a part of their life. And I guess it's almost like a parable for what we are talking about out here, is we need to leave little breadcrumbs behind for people to follow into creating a regenerative climate future for all life to thrive. Not just nature, not just human beings, all life.
Thank you. I think that's the perfect sort of analogy to leave behind, right? Leave little breadcrumbs. And I would definitely say that think out of the box a little bit, maybe, and to reimagine what the future may be like. And I think radical thought to radical action might be a way to go for us, right? I think we're past the time where we could take it easy and go slow. And I'm really glad that I had the three of you here this afternoon to share your experiences, share your thoughts, and inspire us. I think it's incredible to see that with small efforts and with big efforts at different scales, talking to different people through different typologies and methodologies, you can do different things. And we are all reimagining the future in different ways, but with a common goal in hand, right? Previous panels today have talked about adaptive reuse. We've talked about imagining cities like Bjarkenkel's team did. So it's in our hands, isn't it? We are constructing our future. And if we're going to do that, let's think about it a little bit and let's reimagine it beyond what it's just meant to be. So thank you all so much for being here.